My name is Jay Keck. I'm the Habitat Education Manager for South Carolina Wildlife Federation. Just real quick, we don't have bird ID classes, webinars this year scheduled, but that's because we've done them for the last 2 years during COVID. So just go on to our YouTube channel, South Carolina Wildlife Federation's YouTube channel. And I think there's like 40 videos on there. Dr. Austin Jenkins teaches some. We have Clemson Extension teaching others. I teach a few of the bird classes. So, what's that singing in my yard or something like that. If you want to learn how to identify more birds and see more birds, but to learn how to identify them by ear, that one's up there. It gets you ready for springtime. So just search through our YouTube channel and see what's there to help you find more birds this year. All right. Well, it's not just about me today, and I'm very thankful for that. We have Amy Tegeler with us from South Carolina Department of Natural Resources. And I met Amy a few years ago, and she can hammer some EMT conduit down into some floodplain. I've seen her do it with a sledgehammer while we were putting up prothonotary warbler boxes on some DNR property. She's a bird lover, as you heard. Her favorite bird is the one that she's listening to or seeing at that moment, which is the best answer that you can give, I think. I know you're an ornithologist for DNR. I don't know if you're the ornithologist for DNR or what the difference is even, but I'm very happy that you're here to talk about birds and how to, responsibly have them on your property. And please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, with DNR, and we'll get the show going.
Sure. All right. Hi, everybody. So I am the bird conservation coordinator for DNR. And so what that means is that I coordinate all of the non-game bird species projects run by DNR across the state. It's a statewide project. So I have some staff that work on our coastal species, and then red-cockaded woodpeckers, and so I am a bird biologist. I guess it's a short answer for that. I did my undergrad in Indiana, and I got my degree in ecology and wildlife biology. And then I spent 3 years traveling around doing different field work jobs across the state and also Australia. I guess a few highlights were the Australia, working with redback fairy wrens up in Queensland. I monitored some of the seabird colonies affected by the Exxon Valdez oil spill up in Alaska. And then I did some spring migration monitoring along the Gulf Coast in Louisiana, which was spectacular to see those birds flying over the Gulf of Mexico. And then I did my master's in California. And then my last job was in Pennsylvania at the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, their field site, working with bird migration. And then I came here almost 10 years ago. And my experience is a lot of land birds, but also some seabirds and other types of species groups as well.
Real quick question for you, Amy, just kind of a personal one, but as you know, the Baltimore Oriole changed my life 10 years ago. Did you have an experience like that where all of a sudden this bird just captivated you like years and years ago, or were you always just kind of interested?
So I think for me, like I always, like as far back as I can remember, I liked being outside and getting muddy and and stuff, and I cared about animals. I think for me, I was little, maybe like 5, and I saw a duck out in the pond, and looking back on it, I think it was probably just, it had a birth defect, but it really like struck me. It's like that I care about animals. But I didn't know wildlife biology was a job until high school biology class. I read an article, we had to read an article, and in it, a wildlife biologist, I think they were collecting an endangered species of tadpole from a vernal pool that was drying up, and they were literally scooping them up, putting them in buckets to help save the species. And I was like, that is what I'm going to do. From that moment, I knew that's what I was going to do, and not for a second afterwards have I regretted it.
Oh my gosh. Listen, I can't have a talk without saying this one quote, but it kind of speaks to it, what you just said. But There's a quote by a Senegalese forester. His name's Baba Diem, and he says, "In the end, we'll only conserve what we love. We'll love only what we understand, and we'll understand only what we are taught." So it just kind of speaks to the importance of education, right? And just being curious, like Ted Lasso, if y'all have watched that show, and just opening up your eyes to this amazing world. So that's really cool. I don't think we've ever talked about that. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
And so this whole thing started, the idea to ask Amy after last year's, outbreak of, I think, salmonella, maybe another disease or two, at the feeders, and everybody was just getting calls. She was getting calls, we were getting calls. And so we were like, well, let's just have a class on that and just kind of sprinkle in some other things too. So we'll talk about window strikes today. We'll talk about, feeding birds, properly at the house and other things. But I will be quiet now. I'll take questions that come through the chat. Y'all, this is just really informal. So please send questions my way, through the chat box, and we'll just kind of ask Amy questions as she goes. And I appreciate it. Go ahead, Amy.
Sure. All right. So today I'm going to be talking about ways to help keep your backyard birds safe. So birds are attracted to yards that provide food, water, shelter, and space. It's all arranged in ways that meet their needs. And bird feeders and baths are some of the common ways that people can attract birds to the yards. So I'm going to go talk about some of the ways to help keep bird feeders and baths safe, and some bird-friendly lighting. And then Jay is going to talk a bit about the native plants and ways to reduce window collisions that he just talked about. So bird feeders and baths can provide great ways for people to help enjoy birds in their backyards. But because birds congregate at these areas, they can also cause the spread of disease. So I'm going to go through some of the common diseases we see at bird feeders and baths, and then talk about what we can do to help prevent those diseases. So the first disease I'm going to talk about is the salmonella that Jay just referred to, and that hit some pine siskins pretty hard this past winter. It's a bacteria that is commonly found in the environment. It was first discovered in 1885, infecting humans. It spread through feces and saliva, and it can be fatal to songbirds that frequent feeders. Sick birds tend to appear thin, they have fluffed feathers, they're lethargic, and they might have swollen eyelids. However, some individuals can just be carriers and don't have any symptoms. It's the same bacteria, like I said, that infects humans, and it can also infect pets. And it's really common. The next thing I'm going to talk about are bald birds. So sometimes people notice these bald birds, usually cardinals or blue jays in their yards, and this actually is not a disease. Birds periodically lose their feathers. This is called molting. And typically birds will only molt a few feathers at one time, and that helps them regulate their body temperature and still allows them to fly. But sometimes they'll lose lots of feathers at one time, and that's called a catastrophic molt. And sometimes the catastrophic molt will happen on their head, which makes them temporarily appear bald. And this can happen to healthy birds, and it's considered a normal thing. It's also just possible that the bald bird is a young bird and its feathers just haven't quite grown in all the way yet. And then the third possibility is that it's due to feather mites. Feather mites are pretty common, and they aren't typically fatal to birds. And birds are usually able to pick the mites off of their bodies everywhere except for their heads. Another disease commonly found near bird feeders in baths is avian pox. There are two types of avian pox. The most common form creates wart-like growths on the featherless areas of the bird, so around their eyes, the base of their bill, and their legs and their feet. And the second form creates some plaques inside their mouths and their respiratory system, which results in difficulty eating and breathing for the birds. Avian pox has been reported in over 230 bird species, including songbirds, turkeys, and raptors, and also some domesticated species. It is also spread through contacts with surfaces contaminated with feces and saliva, and it is also often fatal. The last disease I'm going to talk about is finch eye disease. A little bit more is known about the spread of finch eye disease than the other diseases I just talked about. It's a bacteria that's similar to pink eye. It was historically documented in domestic species. And then the first detection in a wild bird was in Washington, D.C. in a house finch in 1994. The disease then spread west across the US, and the first detection was west of the Rocky Mountains in 2006. One hypothesis on why house finches tend to get it is because house finches are actually naturally occur in the West, and they were brought over to the east side of the country by humans. Birds that have finch eye disease have red, swollen, rusty, or crusty eyes, pretty similar to pink eye in humans, actually. And it's spread through feces and saliva, just like the other diseases, and is often fatal. Species typically prone to this infection include house finches, purple finches, and American goldfinch. So when you look at these two photos, you can see that some of the diseases can look very similar. The top bird has avian pox, and the bottom bird has finch eye disease. And there are some symptoms that are the same among all the diseases, like fluffed feathers and lethargy. Those are just things that birds tend to do when they don't feel well. And it can also just be an indication of not feeling well to natural causes and not due to disease. All the diseases I mentioned do regularly occur in the environment. They're always out there, but feeders and baths can increase the spread of the diseases just because the birds are in close contact to each other with saliva and feces there. Ultimately, it doesn't matter which disease the bird has. What people can do to reduce the spread of those diseases is the same for all of them.
Quick question for you, Amy. You
Sure.
know, I've been back in South Carolina for 9 years now, and I think we've probably had at least 3, years where I don't know if you call them eruption years, but we've had a, pretty huge number of pine siskins come down, red-breasted nuthatch and purple finch. But it just seems like last year was the only year that we really heard of this huge, issue. Was there, do you have any guesses or any ideas from scientists as to why that was?
Yes. And so, so that was, so the pine siskin, the one that happened, well, one of the two that happened last year was due to salmonella. And like I said, it's always out there. So I don't know that there was more salmonella out there. I don't know if there was, but there were more pine siskins, and pine siskins just seemed to be more susceptible to it than other bird species. So, it was probably just a combination of factors, and maybe that spread the salmonella worse, or maybe it was just a large number of that particular species here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know everybody was seeing pine siskin. It seemed all over the country, but especially here too. There's a couple of questions. Well, just asking what mycoplasma is. Do you know?
Oh dear. No, I'd have to Google that.
We'll get back with you. Okay. Thank you.
All right. All right, so regular cleaning bird feeders and baths is one of the best things that people can do to try to prevent sick or dead birds in their yard. And it's important to clean your feeders and baths year round, not just after you see a sick or dead bird. Seed feeders and baths should be thoroughly cleaned at least once a month with 1 part liquid bleach to 9 parts hot water, and make enough solution to entirely immerse the feeders in the solution. Then allow the feeders to soak for 10 minutes to help loosen all that debris. And then use a stiff brush to wash all the feeder parts inside and out, even through like the holes, the crevices, the perch, anywhere the waste may accumulate. The feeding ports, lids, platforms, reservoirs, even the feeder hooks and poles. For bird baths, wash all of the surface areas. After cleaning, rinse the feeder and all the parts for at least 10 seconds to help remove all of the chemical residue from the bleach. Then allow the feeders to completely air dry before you put the seed back in to help keep the seed from molding. Nectar feeders require some special care because of their design. Nectar feeders should be cleaned each time that they're refilled. Frequent cleaning will help reduce the mold that can grow and helps prevent deadly fermentation of the sugar water. You can use a special bottle, a little tiny brush, a special brush like the one in that middle picture to help clean out those small holes and visually inspect the entire feeder for black mold. And then rinse all the parts out with at least 3 times and allow it to dry completely before refilling it with the sugar water. Just another thing to note about hummingbird feeders, it's best not to try to deter bees or other insects with oil or some other sticky substances around the feeding ports because it can contaminate the nectar. So if insects become a problem, it's best just try to relocate the feeder somewhere else. In addition to keeping bird feeders clean, it's also important to clean the surrounding area. Many birds prefer to forage on the ground or eat spilled seeds, especially when feeders get crowded. So these areas should also be cleaned at least once a month to remove the buildup of hulls, the uneaten seeds, and other waste to reduce mold and diseases for those ground feeding birds. And it also helps prevent rodent infestations. You can use a rake, broom, shovel, or a workshop vacuum even to help remove that waste and then dispose of it appropriately. Another thing you can do is periodically moving feeders around in different locations, which can help reduce accumulation of waste in one particular area.
And
another thing to do is to offer fresh, was there a question, Jay?
Sorry about that. Hey, do you know, we had a question about vinegar. Do you know if it's safe to clean? Okay, go ahead.
Yep, you can also do, 4 parts, 1 part vinegar to 4 parts vinegar, water to, oh dear, 1 part vinegar to 4 parts water for vinegar. Yeah, that is an option as well, especially if you don't want to use the chemicals. Yeah.
And when we're talking about cleaning below, the feeders here, on the ground, I mean, using something like vinegar, would it be good to just, spray where all the feed is, kind of decomposing there and breaking down, like when it's on the ground right there afterwards, or just kind of just clean it up and that's it, that's good enough?
I definitely wouldn't pour bleach down there.
Sure.
I usually suggest people just use like a hose and wash it away.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know about vinegar. Like, I guess that's
Okay.
just not something, I don't know.
Just curious. All right. Thank you.
Another thing that people can do is to offer fresh food. Spoiled bird seed is unhealthy, both for birds and if left on the ground, your pets could get into it too. So food should be stored in a cool area in rodent and waterproof containers. Dispose of any food that is wet, smells musty, or appears moldy. And then contaminated storage containers and scoops should also be cleaned. Another thing about food is to only provide as much food as the birds will eat in 1 or 2 days. And this helps keep it from spoiling. And it also helps make cleaning the bird feeders easier. While cleaning the feeders, inspect them for sharp points or edges that can scratch or cut birds. Even a small scratch can help a virus or a bacteria infect an otherwise healthy bird. It's also good to use multiple feeders and spread them out over a large area in your yard if you can to help reduce crowding. While seeing lots of birds at one feeder, it can be really appealing. The potential for disease transmission increases just because of the crowd. Birds are crowded if they have to jostle each other to get to the ports and to the seeds, and crowding can also cause stress, which can make birds more vulnerable to disease. It's best not to wait until you see a sick or dead bird before cleaning your feeders and baths. But if that should occur, it's best to stop feeding the birds immediately. Remove the dead bird by wearing rubber gloves and placing the bird in a plastic leak-proof bag, and then dispose of it in a trash receptacle, so it's out of the reach of pets and other scavengers. Then wash your hands immediately and then clean all feeders and baths and the surrounding area, following the guidelines I just went over really quickly. And then wait at least 2 weeks before rehanging your feeders and putting out your bird baths. The birds will be okay. They naturally go out to other food sources. That's their biology. So they will just disperse to find their natural food. It just probably won't be in your yard. Sick birds can be reported to a wildlife rehabilitator. And I have a link to our site that lists some wildlife rehabilitators on the slide. And there's also a link to the guidelines for cleaning your bird feeders and baths as well.
And Amy, you said that that they'll disperse and find their food, and probably not in your yard, but y'all, if you plant more native plants, you have
Good
more
point.
oak trees, you have more maple trees that are native, hickories, they will forage in your yard. You just have to provide that habitat. So, you know, always think about that. You know, she has the picture, Amy has the picture of this probably a black cap chickadee. I'm assuming just because Douglas is from up north. But you know, in one of his books, I think he indicates that the chickadee even feeds. I think half of its diet in the wintertime is from insects. You know, so it's not. And think about how many times they're coming to your feeders. Okay, so just think about that. So the more habitat that you have at your house, you know, the more chance that those birds have to forage safely there at an alternative you know site. So anyhow.
No, absolutely. That's a great point. Because, you know, birds like to have they need a diverse diet. So eating seeds 100% of the time isn't the healthiest thing for them. It's better for them to be able to have access to insects and other food sources as well. So providing that in your yard is a great opportunity for people to help birds.
Yep.
All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I wanted to provide some hopefully helpful information about bird food. Because I know a lot of you guys like feeding your birds. The best seed to buy is black oil sunflower seeds. Cheap seed mixes contain a lot of milo, but birds don't really eat milo very often. So birds will end up dumping those seeds out onto the ground. And if you ever notice you have a lot of plants growing underneath your feeders, there's a good chance it's the milo. For suet, if you have problems with squirrels eating your suet, try some hot pepper. Birds love it, but the squirrels won't eat it. For hummingbirds, you don't really need to have red dye in your sugar water, especially if you have red on your feeder. And also some people are tempted to add extra sugar to their nectar, but don't do that. Feed 1 part sugar to 4 parts water, because adding more sugar, it can actually be lethal to the hummingbirds because of their metabolism. It's also important to change the nectar before it gets spoiled or cloudy, and it gets pretty hot here, so that can be as quickly as like 3 days, depending on how warm it is. If the birds aren't emptying the feeder, if they're not eating all that sugar water, then just don't fill it up as much. You can keep it in your fridge for a few days, and it'll make cleaning the feeders easier. One other thing, I just wanted to point out that it's actually not great to feed birds bread. It expands in their stomachs, so they feel full, like they don't need to eat anymore, but it actually provides almost no nutrients for them, and it can be fatal as well. Another thing people can do to help keep birds safe is to reduce light pollution. Many birds, including songbirds, migrate at night, and they use the moon and the stars to navigate. But light pollution can cause birds to become disoriented, possibly because it's more difficult to see the stars, especially during foggy or rainy weather. The result is that birds tend to mill about until they become exhausted, and sometimes they'll just eventually die. Also, sometimes they'll fly into lighted windows, which can be fatal. And unfortunately, the disoriented birds tend to call more. And under natural conditions, it's thought that birds call during nocturnal migration to help them navigate and to form flocks. So what happens is that more birds end up being attracted to these areas with light pollution. There are examples where hundreds or sometimes thousands of birds are found dead around a certain building or in a lighted area in the morning after a foggy night. Or there's some pretty easy solutions to this problem. Replace outdoor lights and security lights that are constantly on with motion sensors, and use outdoor lights that have down-facing shields, like in that top image. There's really no need for the light to go skyward for what people usually use those lights for. And as far as your buildings, using window coverings like curtains can help reduce bird attractions to the lighted windows. And as an added bonus, some of these solutions can also potentially reduce your energy costs. So as I was putting together this presentation, I was thinking about all the actions people can do to help keep birds safe. So the next few slides are just kind of a hodgepodge of topics that I thought of. We all know about reduce, reuse, and recycle. So I'm going to say a couple of things about it. It's best for birds to use natural materials for their nests. However, plastic and other man-made materials can mimic the appearance of these natural nest materials, making it difficult for birds to distinguish the difference. And unfortunately, it can entangle the nestlings or the feeding adults, and plastic bags and balloons can choke or smother them. I've seen many nests with almost all of the nests that I monitor in town have litter woven into them. And I've watched fledglings play with pieces of plastic and plastic bags. The nest in the image is a loggerhead shrike nest with some plastic in it. Another thing to consider is food litter. Food waste doesn't really seem like litter. It's just going to biodegrade, right? But when it's thrown by roads, it attracts birds and other animals to that area and increases the likelihood that they'll get hit by cars. And the same thing happens when people throw out food wrappers. I just like to point out that reduce, reuse, and recycle are listed in a specific order. Only use as much as you need, then try to reuse as much as you can, and then recycling is what's left to do with what you can't reuse. I also get quite a few calls about baby birds. If you find a baby bird out of the nest with feathers, it's probably a fledgling. Fledglings are baby birds that are old enough to naturally leave the nest. They're typically fully feathered with a short tail and wings. They're able to flap their wings, walk, and hop around. It's best to leave them alone as long as they're in a safe place, because the adults will continue to care for them. If at all possible, don't move the baby because the adults might not be able to find it in that case. And at most, put it in a nearby shrub to keep it off the ground. As much as possible, keep people and pets away from that area. But even if a baby bird falls from the nest, frequently the adults will still take care of it. But if the baby bird is still growing feathers and it has limited mobility, then you can place it back in the nest. Birds have a poor sense of smell, so touching the baby bird and the nest isn't likely to cause the birds to abandon it. If the nest can't be reached or can't be found, a small basket lined with tissue can be attached to a nearby branch close to where you think the nest is, and the adults will often still come to it. But they'll be very cautious, and it could take several hours before they approach the nestling. So it's really important to keep humans and pets away from that area during that time period while the adults adjust. It's always best to leave a baby bird in the wild with its parents. So before taking any baby bird from the wild, contact a rehabilitation center and try to make sure that the adults aren't taking care of it first. If you have nest boxes in your yard, some of us were talking about that before this presentation, try to use designs that are easy to open so they can be cleaned after each breeding season is finished. Old nesting material should be removed. I've seen birds that I know came out of nest boxes just covered in mites, like the ones I talked about with the ball birds. And when possible, use predator guards. And the last thing I just wanted to briefly mention was that I get calls from people asking why they don't have birds in their yard anymore. And that's a little tricky. Most of the time, it's just the natural movement of birds between food resources or shelter resources. Water, it's likely something in that area either dissuaded the birds from using your yard or simply just attracted them somewhere else.
And since we're in the same business, I get that question too. Yeah, but I live in Chapin again, and new property owner over here that has a business. He cleared a couple lots, probably about 3 acres total. So guess what? That's shifting some birds. I mean, there are no trees on it anymore, so birds are going to shift. But people ask that question, and no, that was a fantastic answer, very similar to what I say. So I feel good about myself now. Hey, when you're talking about nesting material being removed after the breeding season, you know, a lot of times people will remove that nest right after the first brood, you know, fledges. Are you? I always just wait until December. I never, you know, I don't monitor, you know, mine that I have in my property, but I take all the nesting material out in December or January. Is there one way that's better than the other, or better for the birds, or what do you think?
Um, I guess my guidance on that would be to, you don't have, I think whenever you get around to doing it, so you don't forget. But I don't think it has to be done immediately. Because some birds will use it to roost during the winter in those nest boxes and can use it. I think the mites are more of an issue for like the nestlings. Um, so I mean, I think it's okay to wait until December.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks.
Right. So I think that was like all of my topics. It's kind of a mishmash of lots of things, and I went through them pretty quickly. So if there's any other questions?
Okay.
Wait,
Yeah, I'm
whoever
just kind of looking through the chat box right now. It says, when cleaning out the nest boxes, do we need to clean the box specifically with anything, or just take the nest out?
Yeah. So, you know, I would probably, unless you're going to either just take the nest out, if you're going to wash it, I'd probably, you could use like dish soap or like that vinegar solution. I would suggest the vinegar over the bleach because it'll be hard to wash it out of the wood. If you want to do that, like scrub it and then spray it out with a hose. But I think, yeah, I mean, if people are willing to do that, that's great.
Yeah. Okay.
Instead
That's
of just
awesome.
brushing out the nest material.
Right. No, that's fantastic. And then we have birds hitting windows, and then something about cats. So I think I'm going to start talking now. Hey, can you stop sharing, and then I'll share mine?
Yep.
I don't know if I can. There is a question that says, can rubbing alcohol be used to clean out? Well, I guess in general, can it be used to clean anything? You know, whether we're talking about a feeder or a nest box or.
I guess my main hesitation for rubbing alcohol is that it tends to, as long as you can wash it away adequately, it's fine. But that might be hard to do.
Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. So stick with the either vinegar or the vinegar mix or the bleach mix that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, but definitely if you're using the bleach, definitely wash that out really well as well. That's
Sure.
where there's the vinegar option, which is
Yep.
well.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks, Amy. Amy's going to stick around and just kind of talk about some things that she's done in the past, you know, related to window strikes. But this is a really big passion of mine, you know, stopping this from happening, right? And so I'll show you pictures. This is the before picture of the Ballantine Library. We were able to put material from a company called Kaleidoscape over every single window that you see. And I don't know if y'all knew this or not, but you know, up to 1 billion birds die each year in the United States, you know, the lower 48. That comes from the Smithsonian Institution, you know, pretty well respected science-based, you know, organization. So they estimated around, while they were there, around 100 birds, you know, hitting the window and dying each year at this library. There's a birder that works there on staff, and she estimated around between 5 to 10 birds died each month that she knew about. Okay, so think about the times that she's not there. I think they work from about 9 to 5, 9 to 6. Think about the couple hours beforehand that they're feeding, running into the windows, and then, you know, maybe a couple hours afterwards. And many times they don't see those birds that do die right there, either because they hit the windows and die elsewhere, or they hit them, die there, and a squirrel or a raccoon or, you know, a crow comes and picks them up. So they don't have evidence of one striking that window. So I would imagine many more than just 100 that they, you know, estimated, you know, were hitting those windows. And these are some of the birds that have hit those windows and passed away. The first black and white warbler that my friend that works there ever saw was a dead one, you know, that struck the window. And whenever I think about that, you know, I think about this gorgeous hooded warbler, black and white warbler, going to the tropics for the winter, coming up here to breed, and then, you know, life was cut short because of a reflection. Let me go to the next slide, and I want Amy to talk about some of the studies that she did in a former position, and take it away, Amy, again.
Sure. Oh, so this is one of the projects we had at my last job, which was at Powder Mill Avian Research Center, is the field station for the Carnegie Museum of Natural History. We worked with the American Bird Conservancy to help test what types of designs on glass helps reduce window collisions by birds. And so, see, I think in the next slide I have it again. Yep. So this is what we call the flight tunnel. And in the left image, you can see the person on the right. There's a little window there, and that's where we would release the birds. And then they would fly through the tunnel. And then on the left side, there's two panes of glass. One is like a regular piece of glass, and then one had all sorts of different designs, UV designs, more visible designs. Glass companies, even international glass, I'll go back just for a second. Companies would send us all sorts of panes of glass. Go back. And then, as you can see, like on the far left of the left image, there's that blue part, and that's where we had to look at the sky, so the birds would know they were flying to the sky. And so we captured birds using mist nets at that field site. So we'd have the bird, and then we would release it. And the tunnel was kind of like a little high tech. It actually rotated, so we were able to reflect the light, so the light would hit both panes of glass the same way. All right, you can go next. Okay, so this on the left image, that is the little hole, and you can see that's what the bird would see when it was flying through the tunnel. And we had netting in front of the glass so that the birds couldn't actually hit it when they were choosing. So like in the right image is what the bird would see, and you can see that it sees the two panes of glass, and it has to decide where it's going to fly to. And so I think maybe go on to the next slide. Yeah, so you can see one of these panes has a design, like a UV design on it, and then the other pane is regular. And so if this pane of glass is effective, the bird will see that pattern, and it won't want to fly to it. So it'll fly towards that other pane of glass. And in the right image, you can see there's actually a bird. It's circled in red at the bottom, and it shows the pane of glass without that design on it. And so that's how the American Bird Conservancy kind of helped figure out what patterns to use for their glass. So they had a flight tunnel there, and they also had a flight tunnel in New York.
Yeah, awesome. Now, did you do these studies or this project specifically for a company, just so they could, have a better product, or was it just kind of in general?
So companies so that logistic was through the American Bird Conservancy, but we received panels from all sorts of different companies. So most of these were for like commercial buildings, like skyscrapers. And I remember we got a lot of panes from Germany, all sorts of different kind of companies interested in trying to figure out ways to be more green for their buildings and reduce the mortality of bird collisions.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Anything else you want to add before I continue?
No, that's basically how it all worked. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen that before, and I thought it was a cool project, but now I think it's even cooler because you were a part of it, and I think that's really, really neat, and I appreciate that because that's super important work. So nice job there. So if y'all remember the picture from before where you saw, this perfect reflection of the woods that is on the other side of these window panes. This is the same building, right? But we just put this product up again called Kaleidoscape, and it is a perforated material that it adheres. It's sticky on the side that you can't see right now. It sticks to the glass, and it has basically an opaque barrier, and it just completely or almost completely eliminates the reflection. So let's see, that's been up for about a month and a half, and they haven't had one window strike. So, it works, and they're monitoring it, every day that they're there. And hopefully a year goes by and they still don't have a window strike. So just think about, you know, the effectiveness of that product. And you can see in the picture below, that is the ones on the left that are darker. That is what you're seeing if you can see my cursor right here. So those are covered in this area right here. Those windows are covered with this material right here. These don't have the material yet. I just wanted to kind of show you know, a before or after or side by side. So it doesn't obstruct the view, it darkens it a little bit, but it also cuts back 50% of the UV rays coming into that building, you know, from that side right there. So it's going to reduce the heating bill in the summertime, and it's going to reduce the wear and tear on those books and some of the furniture and the carpet in there as well. So, you know, there's other benefits, but my favorite is, of course, saving the birds. Kaleidoscape and there's Acopian Bird Savers. If you just Google, you know, or go to ABC, you know, American Bird Conservancy, they have a lot of information on window strikes and a lot of companies out there that are, you know, making products to eliminate that chance of having a bird hit your windows again. You know, there's some information about cats, and it seemed like all of y'all are responsible cat owners. We love that. And it seemed like y'all enjoy watching the cats look at the birds while the cats are inside. You know, the birds are outside at their feeders, the cats are inside licking their chops, and they must be acting goofy or something. If y'all enjoy watching them. So I appreciate y'all, you know, doing that and not having them inside. But think about that number. Again, I didn't know any of this stuff before I got into birds when I saw my Oriole 10 years ago. But I like to tell the story of a friend of mine's house in Lexington, South Carolina. Whenever I would visit him, most of the time I would go in between the kitchen window and this bush that was on the outside of the window, right? Because in between the two, there was just a graveyard of bird bones. And I knew the cat, you know, was doing it, but I just didn't really think about, you know, at 8, 9, 10 years old, I wasn't thinking about the consequences, you know, that had to the ecosystem or birds, you know, within the country and around the world. But it was a great place for me to find skulls and bones. And, you know, it was a very efficient hunter, their cat was. But think about those numbers right there, up to 4 billion birds each year die because of cats. Then you have up to 22 billion small mammals, and then hundreds of millions of reptiles and amphibians. I like to tell this story. I always am confused whether I should call her my hairstylist. I can't call her a barber because that's for old men that cut my hair. But she's not an old man. So I get my hair styled, I guess. And she lives on Lake Murray, and she said, "Hey Jay, my cat is always bringing things into the bathroom, you know, prey, whether that's a lizard or a frog or a toad or a bird." And she said, "Hey, it just brought a bird in, you know, a few days ago. Do you want to see a picture of it?" And I said, "Sure." And she knows I'm a bird guy, and I give her a hard time about her keeping her cat outside, but she showed me the picture, and the bird was a female wood duck. So it doesn't have to be a tiny bird, you know, that these cats go after. You know, we're talking about a bird, you know, that easily weighs over a pound, of course. And that wood duck will never, you know, breed again because of her cat. But think about all the other things too that cat is taken out of the ecosystem there. When we're thinking about snakes, when like this this juvenile plain-bellied water snake, the gray tree frog, you know, the golden crown kinglet, you know, those are eaten by something. Around Lake Murray, you know, watch a blue heron feed on the shoreline. Plain-bellied water snakes are on its diet, right? So when a cat takes that out of the ecosystem, we're taking that away from the birds that we love so much. So just think about those numbers. And again, Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service worked together on that study several years back. And I always just like to say, you know, just please enjoy cats inside if you can. There's some great new products out there. I don't know if you've ever seen the Catio, but it's an outdoor patio, but for cats. So it's basically like a giant cage. It's pretty, it's nice. And the outside air, cuts through it. But check out the website, which I have at the bottom of this page. I hope y'all can see it. www.catiospaces.com. And I don't know the people, I've never talked to them, but I am a huge believer that, cats should be kept inside for the benefit of our wildlife. So check it out. The cat, is inside, but outside, but it's definitely not, foraging and predating upon the wildlife outside. Let's see, if you have issues with cats, avoid concentrating birds in one area. We were talking about that too with, whenever diseases are kind of, around the area in a certain month or year. Plant more natives to provide natural food foraging opportunities for birds. So, if you've got 1/4 of an acre or 3 acres like I have, the more native plants, the more foraging areas, that are spread out, it's harder for a cat to kind of pinpoint where those the birds are going to be or other wildlife. And if you have a neighbor whose cats are just roaming, anger usually doesn't get us anywhere, but, maybe invite him or her over or hang out with them and just show them the love of birds, have them connect with something that cat is, possibly predating upon. And let me get to some of the questions. Yeah, kaleidoscape.com. Appreciate you, Gene, for throwing that in there. All right. Let me just go through a couple of these. I'll go through them in just a second. So when I think about, I don't know, I didn't have a better term than trap, whenever I was coming up with this slide right here. But think about each of these properties. You have A and then you have B. Where would it be easier for a cat to hunt for our birds? In A, if he doesn't have a feeder up, there's probably not going to be too many birds in there because the habitat's so poor. But just imagine A, the one with just the turf grass, having a bird feeder there. It's going to be pretty easy for that cat to get to it. But then think about, the B, the one at the bottom, all the different levels, all the different strata, all the different habitat that those birds have to forage in. Now, it might provide some cover for a cat, but, a cat's going to have a hard time getting to birds that are 20 feet in a tree. So, I would say B, of course, is a better place for birds, whether or not there are cats, present. I always like to ask this question too, with these two pictures. If A and B were paintings, which one would you hang on your property? And whenever I do a presentation, I do like to ask this question, and nobody raises their hand for A and everybody raises their hand for B. But then my follow-up question is, why do so many of our yards, properties look like A? If we're going to hang B in our house because it makes us feel good, because it makes us feel warm, whatever the case may be, why do so many of our yards look like A? So just kind of something to think about. Think about how many acres of turf grass are in the United States. I think Audubon or maybe ABC, I can't remember which organization. It might have been a joint effort, but I think the number was around 40 to 45 million acres of turf grass in the United States. If it was concentrated in one area, it would be bad for that one area. But the problem is it's all around the United States. So it causes a lot of fragmentation. Most wildlife, doesn't do well with habitat fragmentation. Think about all the fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, that go into that yard on the top left. Neonics, neonicotinoids, I guess. It's kind of a tough word for me to say. It's just an insecticide. I think it's the most abundant one in the world right now, based on some of the research that I've done. I think that's right. But there is some research coming out that, it gets into our water systems and is affecting, some of our swallows, purple martins, the insects in those waterways that aren't becoming adults and finding their way into the air for, common nighthawks and again, purple martins to forage upon. So think about what you're doing on your property, what you're putting in your property, what you're using to make your grass, look lush and beautiful. It might not be the best thing for wildlife. Remove invasives. All right, we've already talked about that a little bit, I guess. Remove invasives, especially like Nandina. Some of those berries can be poisonous to birds. So, Audubon has plenty of articles on it. I'm sure you can find other ones out there as well. But you're going to find less insects on exotic species as well. So the more natives that you have, the more insects you're going to have. The less pesticides and insecticides you're using, the more insects you're going to have, the more birds you're going to have. And I was really happy when Amy also, talked about litter. Y'all, just get with some neighbors and do some cleanups. The South Carolina Aquarium came up with this great app not too long ago. It's called the Litter Free Digital Journal. Just Google it. All right. So just Google Litter Free Digital Journal. And if you want to add South Carolina Aquarium in there, add that in there too. And you can start these cleanups in your area, and you can record each item that you're picking up, each item or each piece of litter that you're picking up. And hopefully, it could get some things done in your community. If you're finding, thousands and thousands of cigarette butts or, bottles of a certain brand, take it to your mayor and show them that data after a year or two, and maybe some things will change in your neighborhood or your community. But these are all photos from friends of mine here in the Midlands. We have an anhinga with, some kind of plastic netting. I don't think that's fishing wire, but maybe some plastic netting that we put around to keep deer away. Got a green heron right here that Zach Steinhauser found. I think that was at Saluda Shoals. It looked like some fishing twine, wrapped around its bill. It's kind of hard to eat when your bill is tied shut, right? And then just kind of an embarrassing picture. And I love going here to watch, look at waterfowl in the wintertime. It's at Archer's Lake in Irmo by Harbison. Great place to find migratory warblers and migratory ducks in the wintertime. But look at all that trash in the background. You see the great blue heron, and beyond it is all sorts of trash. So the trash is breaking down, it's causing problems, and we can do something about it. That just takes your time and your energy. But please consider doing some of those cleanups and recording that data. I heard this bird this morning. All right. And if y'all want to chime in on the chat box and tell me and Amy what this bird is, we would love to hear your guesses. Okay. And then we're going to talk about why this bird is problematic. Okay. So I heard this bird this morning, and I just added this onto the presentation today. And real quick, I'll give you 3 seconds to turn your volume up on your computer. All right, here we go. What does your skin do, Amy, whenever you start hearing those sounds? Any guesses, y'all? Any guesses at all? All right, we have a no idea. All right, that's okay though. Yeah, there we go. We've got a good one there. So a brown-headed cowbird is what that is. And even though we do have pretty forested area here, there are plenty of yards too. We've got a big neighborhood behind us, and there's a lot of fragmentation. And the cowbird, the brown-headed cowbird, loves fragmented areas. So Amy, would you mind telling us about that bird a little bit?
Sure. So just a quick little aside about the song since you played it. So brown-headed cowbirds have one of the highest pitched bird songs of the North American species. It's 16 kilohertz, the highest point.
Wow.
So brown-headed cowbirds, they are a native species to US. However, they do really thrive in fragmented habitats. And what they do, they have a different breeding strategy than many other bird species. Most typically, at least with the songbirds especially, the male will come in, defend a territory, and the female will build a nest and lay eggs, her eggs in it, and incubate, and they fledge. But what brown-headed cowbirds do, their strategy is called nest parasitism. So they don't really defend a territory, and they don't build their own nest. What the female will do is she will lay an egg and another bird's nest, and she just spreads them all out in all these different nests. And what often happens is the brown-headed cowbird nests, the eggs are much larger than the host species nest. And that's on purpose. So that way, when the eggs hatch and there's nestlings, it's larger. So it's more competitive for the food resources when the adults bring food to the nest. And so it's very common for the host nestlings to die because they're not able to get the resources, the food that they need to survive. And it's just the brown-headed cowbird nestling that survives. And then the adults use up all their energy and resources for that species instead of their own. And because the habitat is so fragmented, their numbers continue to increase.
Yeah. And it's kind of funny. One of the things that just popped up in the chat is like cuckoo birds, question mark. So, you know, from what I understand and what I've read, you know, they're talking about, you know, in the old world cuckoos. So not the ones that we have here so much, but possibly, you know, I'm sure there's some records of it. I think I have read that too, but, you know, here in the United States, I think the problem bird, you know, is the brown-headed nuthatch. And again, the reason why it's the problem has grown is just because of habitat fragmentation. They love that.
I keep on saying brown-headed nuthatch as well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I might have done that too. Sorry if I did. It's a brown-headed cowbird.
Brown-headed cowbird.
Every time Jay and I talk about it, it's the cowbird, not the nuthatch.
Sorry about that. Yeah, brown-headed cowbird, not brown-headed nuthatch. So, you know, what can you do in your neighborhood then, or on your property? You know, you typically don't see them in heavily forested areas, okay? Or you at least see them less. So the more trees you have, the less of a problem with brown-headed cowbirds you're going to have. And if you can get your neighbor to plant more trees and his neighbor and their, you know, it's gonna kind of not really choke it out, but you know, it's going to create an environment that they don't really, you know, like as much as those edges and those areas that are fragmented. So it's a great bird. It's a beautiful bird, you know. You know, a lot of people like it, but boy, there are a lot of people that don't like it. Amy, can you eliminate this bird from your property when you see it legally?
So not legally.
Right.
So they are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is a federal regulation which protects birds and their parts, including feathers and nests, and eggs and nestlings. I do think some people can get a depredation order, but that is like under special circumstances. It's not like you could get it to remove them from your backyard, probably.
Right. Right. So, you know, I wouldn't go around harming the bird, but, you know, just try to make better habitat for on your property. And, you know, over time, it will reduce the amount of brown-headed cowbirds you do have, or it should. So that is the picture of a brown-headed cowbird. If you've never seen one before, that picture's from Merlin Bird ID. It's one of my favorite apps that I have on my phone. And that's where the sounds came from as well. So other challenges, you know, that wildlife have, birds in particular. Just think about all the people. Like, think about if you're a mother or a father or a grandfather or a grandmother. You know, think about your grandkid or child looking at a screen, staring at a screen. Does that make you happy? Probably not. You know, think about how many, you know, kids do watch screens, and how many hours they do in a day. Those people aren't connecting with nature, right? So we have more people, you know, on social media and in front of screens, and less people, you know, connecting with nature, which causes us really not to care about it. It's a little bit easier to wing that piece of trash out your window whenever you don't care about the planet, right? Or the wildlife within it. Travel sports, good gracious, so many people play it all year long now. Internet fear, you know, will keep some people out. But I would argue that education and getting some experience with it can help that. Habitat loss and fragmentation of land is one of the largest drivers of wildlife decline, bird decline. And then invasive species again, you know, like the Bradford pears, Nandina, I mean, there's just loads and loads and loads of exotic plants that are here. Not just exotic, but exotic invasive species that will take over an ecosystem. So, you know, Bradford pears have chemicals in those leaves that our insects aren't accustomed to. They haven't evolved with them. So they physiologically can't digest those chemical components. And so when you eliminate your native trees or your native plants from your property, and you like the exotics because they're prettier, they're different from your neighbors, you're introducing chemicals and a potential food source, but they have those chemicals in them that our insects aren't used to. So it doesn't become a food source for them. You basically eliminated the food, when you eliminated the native plants. So, really think about removing those invasives or those exotics that you have on your property. I do have some exotics on my property that aren't invasive, but probably, 90% of my plants on my property, which is again, a few acres, are native. That's a beautiful picture of the indigo bunting, by the way. Let's see. I appreciate y'all being with us. I'm going to get to some of these questions. We're right at an hour here. More reasons to not have Bradford pears. Another tree. Let's see. All right. Any other questions that y'all may have while we, Amy and I are still on? I really encourage y'all to go out there and pick up some trash. Even better, record what you're picking up on that app that I told you about, the Litter-Free Digital Journal from the South Carolina Aquarium. Plant more natives. The more and more nurseries are starting to carry natives because more and more people are buying them. Okay, so it's a good thing. It's a good trend that we're seeing. And on our website, I sent the link in the chat box earlier at the beginning of the presentation, but there is a link under our native plant section on our website where you can see, as far as we know, we try to find all the native plant providers here in South Carolina. So we might miss a few of them. So apologies if we do, but they're listed on our website. Somebody mentioned that there's a big native plant sale this weekend in the upstate. Let's see. What about small decals purchased from bird stores to keep birds from hitting windows? Do you want to chat about that, Amy, or you want me to?
Yeah, I can. So, so window decals can be effective if they're applied the right way. So like if you just find a really cool decal of a bird or a flower or something, you stick it in the middle of your window, it's probably not going to be effective. So if you think about it, when birds are moving through their natural environment, they're like flying real fast through like shrubs and like trees, like all these really close branches, and they're able to maneuver that. So when they see the reflection of plants in a window, that unless if there's big gaps around a decal, they're still going to see those as tree branches, and they're still going to not be hindered by that. They're still going to fly towards it. And there are specific design patterns that the American Bird Conservancy has figured out to help reduce that. Some of them are vertical lines, some of them are like horizontal designs. There's a whole bunch on their webpage. And I think there might be a link to that in the cleaning bird feeder guidelines web link I provided.
Yeah, and after this webinar, once we have this video or this webinar recorded and edited, we'll send out another email with additional links so y'all can do some research, on your own. We'll send some really great links with some really great information. Let's see here. Yeah, I would look up the South Carolina Native Plant Society. I know the Midlands Native Plant group just had their plant sale this past weekend. The Greenville one, I'm not sure when they're going to have it, but I would just look up on the South Carolina Native Plant Society, when and where. I know they just had theirs in Charleston too. So unfortunately, they just had them. I'm not sure about the upstate though. Oh, nope, somebody knows. Greenville is April 2nd, so that's coming up. So if you missed your native plant, sales at the coast and in the Midlands here, April 2nd looks like you're good to go for the Greenville one. Just again, go online and it should be a quick Google search for that. 8:30 to 1 p.m. at Conisty Park. Awesome. Thank you for that. Amy, is there anything else that you want to tell us to be better stewards of our planet, or specifically our birds?
I think we covered a lot of different topics today. And, all of the topics we covered do directly, like really real life, impact bird populations. I don't know if you guys have heard about the 3 million birds idea, that there's 3 million less birds on the planet now than there were just a few decades ago. And that's lost due to some of these things that Jay and I talked about. And we tried to talk about things that are very hands-on, practical things that people can do.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, y'all, if we didn't get